We're joined by our good friend Zach Gelb, Infinity Sports Network and national talk show, and with us on Wednesdays. And Zach, thank you, man. Hey, I saw a video on your Twitter feed. Where were you having dinner? Where they were? Was that like a fillet or something that you were having for dinner?
Yeah, there was a lot of steak last night. I got invited to this dinner, and it was this place called Reserve Cut right around my apartment. And they put 2 steaks on the table, and then they put one in the pan, and they just started cooking the entire thing. It was pretty cool. A lot of fire everywhere.
It looked delicious, no doubt about it, and glad you had a nice meal. So what were your takeaways, 1, 2, or maybe 3 of them, about the release of the first college football standings?
Yeah, so I was not in favor of going to 12 teams. I thought it was too big of a jump. Outside of last year, I didn't really think there was a year where we thought, okay, we needed more than 4 teams in the college football playoff. So I would have liked to have seen, it go to maybe 6 or 8. But when you get to actually see the bracket last night, I'm like, man, these first round matchups are unbelievable. And I'm absolutely hooked. The other takeaway that I have, and I had this opinion for a while, I think if you win your conference championship, you don't need to be guaranteed a bye. I just think you should be guaranteed a spot into the college football playoff. And what does it for me, and I get it, right, perceived to be right, the Big Ten and the SEC, the ACC, and the Big 12, you would think would be better than the Group of 5 winner that gets in. But to just have that team be at 12 and then to have the conference champions get a bye, the other conference champs get a bye into the top 4 spots, I would just say, if you win your conference championship, you get in, but you're not guaranteed to get a bye.
Yeah, I mean, they're I'm sure they're going to make tweaks to it, and I bet you it'll be at 16 before we pass go. I mean, we're not going to have that much longer on it. But Zach, Alabama, Penn State in particular stick out to me as teams that have been given a pass on their inclusion in this, at least with Penn State, how high they are compared to other teams. Do you think that's historical bias? Why would they be over, a BYU or an Iowa State or someone like that?
Brand recognition. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, but that's what the committee has done in the past. Like, hey, one of my producers was saying Miami, should they really be as high as they are? To get their undefeated, but who the heck have they beaten? They've almost lost some games. So I would say why Alabama is still in is because they beat Georgia. And Georgia, right, was in the top 4 teams. So that they were going to find a way to keep them in. And if they suffer another loss, they will be out. And sure, Penn State, they beat West Virginia when we thought West Virginia was going to be good before the start of the season. They almost lost to Bowling Green shortly after that. And their biggest test of the season, they lose to Ohio State. And even though it didn't feel like they were in the game, but obviously they were because they had the ball right on the goal line at the end. But Ohio State was clearly the better team. We know how highly ranked Ohio State is in at the number 2 spot. So I'm assuming because of the losses and where the losses were, even though some of those teams you mentioned don't have a loss like BYU, and we know Iowa State just lost this past weekend, maybe it's because they have better losses and closer losses and the brand recognition is why the rankings are where they are.
Zach, Penn State's another one of those teams that's really bandied about after last night, their positioning. But I'd like your thoughts on the whole James Franklin and big game, inability to kind of climb that mountain. What are your thoughts on his struggles in beating the best teams?
It's why I call them Participation State University. Like, that's what he's turned them into. He's done a really good job there. But if the goal is to just show up every year and you win the games that you're supposed to win, and then when you go up against the big dogs in years past, Michigan, I know Michigan's down this year, and Ohio State, it's crazy. And here's the thing. He doesn't call the defensive plays. He doesn't call the offensive plays. He doesn't recruit the best talent in the world because they don't have a wide receiver really on that team. But with the new offensive coordinator coming in, I was told everything was going to be different. And early on in the season against West Virginia, it looked like that. But to be on the 3-yard line and you don't run a direct snap to your best offensive player and Warren just having bulldozed through, I don't get that. And they had a pick 6, and in the big spot, right, this offense, they only had 2 field goals. And then afterwards, this is why I really can't stand James Franklin, if you can't tell. It's one thing to lose. But then when you lose, I'm not saying you have to show class, but don't act like an ass. And this guy constantly acts like an ass, and he always blames something to try to take away from the loss. Like a few years ago against Ohio State, we're not an elite program because the kids didn't sit in the first row of class. Like, I just heard Jamar Chase say he didn't really take classes or study for classes for tests when he was in college. You know what Cardell Jones said all those years ago. Yeah. And then after the game, he's getting into it with the fan, and he rings a victory bell when they didn't win the game. And then he's like, oh, 99.9% of the other programs would love to be in the spot that we're in. There's always just some lame excuse, or he just acts like a clown when he loses. And this is a guy, when I was at Temple, when Matt and PJ Walker were kicking his teeth in, he stopped the game to check the PSI level of the football. Like that's how lame this dude is. And I wish I was kidding, but I'm not. All those things that I just said were true.
Do you feel like that the 12-team playoff has taken away from the regular season, or does it make it more interesting?
Before the year, I would have said yes. I'm not going to lie. I haven't felt like this regular season is meaningless this year. I think this is as good as a regular season as we've seen in quite some time. And I think it helps that a lot of these big schools did go down early in the season. So there's not as much, wiggle room left. But maybe if those losses didn't happen, okay, you could afford a loss at the end of the season. But still, look at what happened this past weekend, right? Everyone's talking about A&M this, A&M that, how great A&M is, and how they're on the verge of making the college football playoff, and then they lose where they score, allow South Carolina to score 24 points in the second half and beat them by 24 points, and now it's like A&M is on the outside looking in, and they still got a chance to make the playoff if they win out. So I don't think, even though I thought it would, I don't believe the regular season has been taken away. I'll be curious, though, at the end of the season when you have some of those rivalry games and they meet up again in the conference championship game. If you beat a team once, can you beat a team twice, in back-to-back weeks? That's something that stands out. But for the most part, I don't think I've seen a big difference in a negative way.
Ole Miss and Georgia this weekend's the best game. Does Carson Beck shake it off finally?
I'm not going to say right now that Georgia's losing this game. And I know it was one performance by Ole Miss. And Ole Miss has been up and down. And, hey, Lane Kiffin can't win a big game either. But when you look at Ole Miss, we know they could score. I still think Georgia's one of 3 teams right now that I feel good about winning a national championship. But I've been on this train for a while. I just have not been impressed by the quarterback. Too many turnovers. And I was told this guy was supposed to be the number 1 pick of the draft. He was going to win the Heisman Trophy, right? I was believing all that stuff. And when I watch football this year, Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward have been the quarterbacks that are eligible for the draft next year, the 2 quarterbacks that impressed me the most. Milrow's been too up and down, bad awareness. I don't think Gabriel is going to be a top 15 pick. Quinn Ewers, I think, is more of a college quarterback than a pro quarterback, but I've been so disappointed with Carson Beck. It's wild. He could go on and win a national championship this year, and even though I wouldn't be disappointed, I could still be slightly disappointed in terms of, I'm not talking about the team, but with him individually, because I thought for sure he would have been a top 10 pick this season. With what I've seen so far, I would not be picking him in the top 10.
Zach, you brought up the Heisman there briefly. How does Ashton Jeanty fit into your bigger picture? How do you view his, the competition that he plays, playing on the West Coast? Not everybody gets to see him. Just what's your your pecking order of guys that end up in New York, and how does he fit into that puzzle?
Yeah, so I think he has a very good chance, in my opinion, to win the award. I look at it, as long as they win their conference and they are in the college football playoff, he'll definitely be a finalist. And, I'm seriously considering him on my ballot right now for the number 1 spot. You get 3 votes if you vote for the Heisman. I think right now 4 guys could win the Heisman. Jeanty, obviously, Travis Hunter, obviously, and then Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel. If I had to vote today, I would probably say Jeanty is 1, Ward is 2, and Hunter is 3. And it goes to the most outstanding player in the country. But I do think the team success is ultimately going to dictate who wins this award. If Cam Ward, as great as he is, and I know it hasn't always been this case, but that's how I think it's shaping up this year. If Miami goes down and they don't win the ACC and they're not in the playoff, I think he loses the Heisman then. If Boise State somehow finds a way to lose in their next few games, I think Genty's out of it. And the same, obviously, you look at Travis Hunter, I think he's a finalist either way. What he does, no one does in the country. And now Colorado has a chance to get to a Big 12 championship game and win the Big 12 championship game. So I do believe that those will be the 4 finalists. If you want to throw a 5th, I guess you could throw Shedeur in there, but I would say those would be the 4 finalists right now.
Yeah, it's tight though. I don't think there's a little separation, but that's why they have games to play, right? We got to watch the rest of the month of November.
Like when Caleb Williams won it 2 years ago, you knew he was going to win it. When Jaden Daniels going into last year, you knew he was going to win it. When we go into now the final few weeks of the season, I think, like I said, there's 4 guys there, but I don't think anyone could tell you who will definitely win it. You know, if you put a gun to my head right now, I would say Cam Ward, just because most of the time, you know this, I'm not saying who I would vote, but most of the times it usually is a quarterback award these days.
Zach, I saw a note from you. Paul, you have a question for me? Go ahead.
I do. You mentioned how much you disliked Franklin and Day last week. Do you have a list of coaches that fall in this category? Like, who else is on the list?
That's a good question. You know what? I wouldn't put this guy on the list before the start of the season, but I think Mike Gundy is trending. I
was wondering
on that list, just with what he said about
on your list. I know, right? Dabo's on the list.
Dabo is definitely on the list. And you know what? Let me tell you, I felt so bad for Dabo Sweeney. Everyone jumping back in, and then he gets smacked by Jeff Brom and Louisville. But Gundy I used to love because, right, you know, the whole "I'm a man, I'm a 40," it was fun. But what he said about the fans the other day, I didn't love. And then before the start of the season, he was just a complete ass when talking about Ollie Gordon and what happened with Ollie.
You had a tweet about Dak Prescott and the fact that some thought or think that he quit on the team. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, so I saw the headline. James Jones, who I like, you know, he does a good job. He was on his show on Fox. I believe it's called The Facility on FS1. And he said he thinks Dak is quitting on the team. And I'm critical of Dak. I've said for a while, Dak's not going to win you a Super Bowl. You probably never get to an NFC championship game with Dak. He's a good but not a great quarterback. Good quarterbacks get paid great money. But whenever I watch Dak Prescott, I don't think they lose because he's quitting and just because he has a hamstring injury. And Jerry Jones goes on 105.3 The Fan and says he expects him to go on IR, and he still hasn't been on IR yet. I think people see that and they're like, 4 weeks for a hamstring, he's quitting on the team. I just don't think it's fair to Dak. Like, there are a lot of things that get said about Dak Prescott that are fair. To accuse him of quitting on the team, I thought was unfair for Dak Prescott.
Yeah, that's kind of crossing a line. You better know if you say that.
Yeah. Zach, I'll tell you this. I don't think Dak's going to play another snap for them this year. I think they'll make – and I don't think it's because he's quitting. I just think there's going to be no benefit in having them potentially get hurt for a team that, you know, might get another win or two the rest of the year. They're bad. They're really, really bad. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, Dak's never going to win you a Super Bowl or get you to an NFC championship game if you don't maximize everything around him, which they clearly haven't done. Like, you can get you an NFC championship and a Super Bowl with a quarterback like Dak if you build around him, but they don't do that. They're not even close.
So here's the mistake that they made, and I'm going to sound hypocritical here. If you were going to pay Dak, which they did, they should have paid him before the start of free agency so they could spread out the money, and then they could actually be all in. But once they did not pay him going into free agency, I would not have paid Dak. I would not have paid Tua. I was outspoken on that. And I would not have paid Trevor Lawrence. And you look at it right now, all those guys got paid. Trevor Lawrence isn't playing well. Tua got hurt. I know he's back. And they've lost 2 since he's been back. And Dak Prescott is hurt. And they're on the verge of, obviously, they're going to miss the playoffs. So teams rush to pay their quarterbacks. And I feel like once one domino falls, all the other ones fall. But all 3 of those teams right now are not going to be making the postseason. And all 3 of those teams overpaid their quarterbacks.
Zach, great stuff, man. Thank you very much. You made me hungry when I saw that video of that steak that was being cooked right in front of you. Glad you had a great dinner. And thank you, as always, for your time with us on Wednesdays. We love the show, Infinity Sports Network. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Smokey. And with the barbecue you guys have, I'm sure you can make me, like, salivate over food.
Yeah, no, I'm throwing up a video by the end of the week, so get ready for that. And I'll tag you in it, too.
Just don't have the brisket look like Lincoln Riley's from a few years ago. That was dry. Later, guys.
Thank you.
That was the beginning of the end for him.
Yep,
that was it.
He's never been the same, neither of his teams. Thank you. That's Zach Gelb with us.